this lands in their hands. But is the MVP permanently reserved for just quarterbacks? What if an elite wide receiver snagged more than just passes? It'd take a real Hail Mary, as no wide receiver has ever taken home NFL's most coveted award. It would take some real video game-like numbers. Your love for the wide receiver runs deep.
It's my quarterback.
Yes, T.O., they love their quarterbacks as well. It is the hardest position on their gridiron to master, but this is all about the wide receiver taking home the hardware for at least just one time. I mean, come on, a kicker has even won MVP. The toe tapping, speed burning, big body posting, yak stacking, one hand high point catching, swag game dripping divas that this game passes, I mean runs through. But just being an elite wide receiver, even the GOAT, doesn't mean you are an auto-lock MVP frontrunner. Jerry Rice knows firsthand. His closest call was in 1987. He finished second, narrowly trailing John Elway. However, it was Rice's teammate Joe Montana who vultured some votes. Rice not walking away with a hardware that season almost makes me think that there's a glitch in this wide receiver MVP code. It's a catch-22, a tandem going down a one-way street with no exit. If a wide receiver has a great season, it is directly correlated to his quarterback, the leader of the clubhouse. To produce that MVP season, he would have to statistically outperform his own teammate and have votes not go the way of the quarterback. So that's it. For the sidekick wide receiver to win MVP, he just has to beat out his superhero quarterback? If the teammate isn't taking home the hardware, it's the other field generals in the league like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson. All of them have to have a so-so statistical year. It'd be like a cheat code coming in to program them all. No correlation here. This comes down to good old-fashioned luck. The offensive scheming that teams do to help quarterbacks get stats on a weekly basis, plus the dual threat nature of some of these guys, they get double stat acknowledgement. Also, typically, they're faces of the NFL. Speaking of schemes, defensive coordinators find it a little easier shutting down a true number one alpha wide receiver, sending double teams directly to the wide receiver's side of the field, or having a lockdown corner. Defensive coordinators find it a little easier to shut down that elite wide receiver than that elite quarterback. So I'm building this season up in my head with stats, and I'm hoping you can help. What do you think it will take for a wide receiver to take home the MVP trophy using those stats? However, another issue for wide receivers is if their team is up big, you won't be constantly throwing it around the field, but controlling the time of possession, most likely with a good run game. Or also having a running back vulture those touchdowns around the goal line. Our wide receiver might have to come from a middling team who's struggling to make a playoff run, but they can't be on an awful team. Winning is also a very important aspect to that MVP. Your team has to have a decent win-loss record. Take, for example, Calvin Johnson's record-breaking receiving yards in a season. The Lions finished at 4-12. Megatron's receiving yards came in buckets because, well, the Lions were constantly losing games. Building our MVP season is like walking a tightrope. You need your team to be trailing games and not losing them, and not eliminated from playoff contention, and not have an elite ground game, and to have a okay to good but not great quarterback who steals votes. Okay, now on to those stats. The most amazing statistical seasons from a wide receiver have not even made a dent in the MVP voting. I give you the Triple Crown, when a wide receiver leads the league in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Since 1960, there's only been 5 wide receivers to capture the Triple Crown. Most recently, Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp. Here's my favorite part. Let's build our hypothetical wide receiver MVP season using stats. Let's start first with receptions. A high number of receptions does not usually vault our wide receiver to the top of the MVP race. The NFL record was 149 by Michael Thomas. He never came into MVP talks, but let's shoot for about 150. Next is yards. As spoke earlier, Megatron didn't even come close in the MVP voting that year. Yards is a much tougher stat. because of the dependence now of offenses having 2 wide receivers on the roster. So let's have our wide receiver reach the record of 2,000 yards. Well, why not? Let's add another 100. 2,100 yards. And lastly, and I think most important, is touchdowns. Jerry Rice holds his record. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. It says Moss there with 23. But Rice caught 22 in a season with 12 games. A season with only 12 games. Getting into the scoring category is essential for our MVP. Moss wasn't even on the MVP board that year as Brady threw for 50 touchdowns and the Pats went undefeated. Rice averaged about 2 touchdowns that year and was one of the closest wide receivers to get MVP talks. So let's shoot for 27. So this is where I need you. These are roughly the stats we'd need for a wide receiver to take home the MVP. Ridiculously hard and almost record-breaking for each stat category. Let me know in the comment section below, who do you think will be the first ever wide receiver to take home the MVP and your arguments for why.